Good evening. My name is Gary Levinson, and I'm the Artistic Director of the Chamber Music Society at Fort Worth. Great pleasure to be here with one of my friends and a wonderful soloist, Andres Diaz. Andres is one of the foremost cellists in the world, one of the great pedagogues, and one of the things we'll do today is kind of find out how he became such a great pedagogue and such a great soloist. Andres, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We both come from musical families.
Yes.
Although you have more siblings than I do because I'm an only child.
Oh, yeah.
But we both have fathers who are very, very famous musicians. Maybe you can start with telling us what was your relationship like with your father and how you fell in love with music.
My father originally took me to I must have been maybe three and a half years old, and he took me to a rehearsal that because my father was a principal violist of the Philharmonic in Chile, and it was a guitar concerto. It was the Aranjuez concerto, and I just had a real affinity for the classical guitar, and that still to today is my favorite instrument. There's something about the classical guitar that I think is so beautiful, so pure.
Absolutely.
And it just turns out that in the first movement of this piece, there's a beautiful cello solo.
No, well.
And as soon as that cello solo happened, I thought, wait a minute. And that's sort of how it happened. And I then, not long after that, Leonard Rose came to play with the orchestra, and I went to hear him, and Fournier came to play, and my dad got me a little, essentially viola. It was like a big viola that he had that I was very small for my age.
It'd be hard to tell because even sitting down like this, you're a pretty tall guy.
Yeah.
You really filled up.
But then I went from that to a smallish cello. We didn't have this was in Chile, of course. We didn't have access to the tiny little instruments that they have now. But I just loved it. I loved working hard. I loved listening to my parents play. My mother was a pianist, so and I used to hear them rehearse all the time. I used to like to get under the piano and just listen to her practice.
Yeah, practically the same story as mine. With both my parents play, and you hear that.
Yeah.
When you speak of Chile, how would you compare or contrast, for that matter, the education, let's say pre-teen, to what one might find in the United States?
Obviously, you're talking about music.
Yes.
Music was not something that was taken people loved music. It's one of the really wonderful places to go play a concert because people love to go to the concerts. It's a real event. But the music education wasn't really done that seriously there, and that's why my father wanted to get us to America, to North America, to study. And I think it was because of the fact that as a musician, you really could barely make a living there. So it wasn't something that was really taken that seriously. There were no youth orchestras. There were no, we played in tiny little, student recitals and things like that. But for the most part, I really started playing a lot more once we came to this country. I had already been playing for 5 years when we moved.
Amazing.
I was 9.
Yeah. One of the things I most admire about you is how serious you are about the craftsmanship of playing the instrument. And it's frankly quite surprising that you say that the environment in which you grew up was not that serious. Clearly, your family environment was very, very serious. So can you maybe talk to us about the change? Was there any kind of a change once you moved to the United States?
Having said that about the music not being taken that seriously, I have to say that my first cello teacher was really something else. He was mean. Oh my goodness.
Old school.
Old school. Yeah.
We love that.
And so he's actually had some really successful students.
Teaching in Chile.
They don't teach it. They've all left Chile.
I see.
Yeah, but I believe he's still living. But he's still mean. But yeah, it's just a very different thing here. He expected from day one that you would play in tune and with a beautiful sound. That's what he was selling.
Wow. That's the way to do it, yeah. The prerequisite.
It's very interesting how you can take somebody really young and make them make a beautiful sound. It's not any more difficult to make a beautiful sound, I don't think, than it is to make a sound that's unpleasant.
Yeah, there's discipline about it, and obviously you have to know what you're doing as a student too.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of my younger son, Gabriel, decided a few years ago that he really wanted to play the trumpet. And so I said to him, look, I'll get you a trumpet, but I can tell you the hardest thing you can do on a trumpet is play softly with a beautiful sound. And he was like, oh, okay. So it's like I challenged him to be able to do this. And he was just upstairs practicing, like making a very, very soft sound. And he got his beautiful sound. Next thing you know, like that same year, he was, the principal trumpet in the band at school. So it's something that can be learned from day one.
Yeah. It's so wonderful to hear that, because I think oftentimes we hear all kinds of things that don't involve the sonic signature, if you will. And to have something like that is really great, because in my opinion, I think you would share this, the way you sound is really your signature as an artist, and that's something that I think we all really look forward to. I know a lot of us will say, the great artists of old, like Fournier.
Right.
You could tell him from one note.
Oh, sure.
It would never sound like Roscoe.
All these guys, just yeah.
Yeah. So skipping ahead, our audience no doubt knows that you were one of the youngest winners of the number competition, and clearly the preparation must have been incredible. But once you win the competition, take us through how your life changed.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Not just preparing for it, but now you've won.
Well, it was really stressful. I was in New York for a whole week, from the first round to the finals. And actually the finals were on the day that Carnegie Hall closed, in the big hall. When Carnegie Hall closed to be redone in 1986.
Yep.
And the preparation that went into that, I mean, there was an enormous amount of music that they wanted. I'm sure it's still the same, if not more. An American 20th century piece, 2 concertos, and then 2 full recital programs. Wow. I gave myself a month to prepare. And it was just, day after day after day of just going at this music. The reason why I did competitions was never to win them. It was actually to make me practice, because nothing made me practice like those competitions. I remember, they announced the prizes, and I went to a payphone somewhere.
Pre-cell phone days.
Pre-cell phone, yeah. And I called Lawrence Lesser, my teacher at New England Conservatory, and he was like, oh, wow. And then he said, your problems have just begun. And then he hung up.
Instead of congratulations.
No, I got the congratulations. Maybe at some point after that. But, and he was right. I mean, you hit after winning something like that, you hit the ground running.
Wow, of course.
My first concert was with the Chicago Symphony at Ravinia. Haydn in D major. I mean, it was just in the amount of rep was. I mean, I've always worked really hard, so I had already played all 6 Bach suites. I had played all the Beethoven sonatas. I had played pretty much every standard concerto. So I knew the stuff. It's just that the way that it rushed by was at quite a different clip as to what I was used to before. But it was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah.
I was, like I said, I was playing a lot before,
right,
but not the kind of concerts that came with winning the first prize.
Sure. And it's important to remember you still had school to go to. You still had to complete your degree. You still had to do all your classes, chamber music, lessons, everything else, and still, by the way, have a solo career.
Right.
So,
yeah, I was still in school.
You were still in school, yeah.
Yeah.
My last question. We obviously have a great connection through chamber music, and you've always had the love of chamber music. Would you say that came from your father, or did you develop it possibly later? Obviously, your brother is a great violist, the former principal violist of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and now the dean of the president of the Curtis Institute. So,
Right.
that's something you had in the family. But is there a point where you really felt like you were in love with chamber music as much as solo, as much as teaching?
We used to do family concerts together. Probably the most amount of chamber music that I did when I was growing up would have been sonatas and stuff like that with my mother, or eventually with my stepmother. But playing actual like chamber works, bigger chamber works, quintets, quartets, piano trios, and things like that, I really had absolutely no experience until I went to the conservatory.
Yeah, New England Conservatory.
Yeah, and that was that was a little bit of a little bit of a rough patch for me, because I think I was pretty green.
Well, that's why you go to music school, to learn.
No, and I just remember my first summer at Tanglewood. They put me in the first group that I got was Beethoven Opus 131 C sharp minor, and so that was sort of jumping into the deep end.
Do you remember who you played with?
Yes, the first violinist was Dean Balthaser. I don't remember the second violinist's name, Jason somebody, and the violist was Dean's girlfriend, Anne, and she was terrific.
She was a really player.
It was a great group, but and we coached with Joel Krosnick, and I mean he essentially just talked us through every single note. This is the way this is written. This is why he wrote it this way, and if you see this, you turn it upside down, you put it over here. That's where that theme comes from. I mean
That's the way to coach.
It was like what was happening between the brain and the pen.
Yeah.
When he was writing it, it was really something.
That's phenomenal.
Spectacular.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much. Let's hear some music, huh?
Great.
All right. Thanks. That was great.
So be careful in the prelude. Is that sometimes when you play a note a little bit longer, and then the same thing in the same harmony gets repeated, that you not play the same note the same way that you did the first time. In other words, so if you play a... Do you see what I'm talking about? So I like the longer note. I think that what you're doing is you're establishing the harmony, right? Right? Can you try? Yeah, right there. So, right? So it doesn't, so that note is not too long twice.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's nothing's happening harmonically. Essentially, it's not moving there. He's just going back and forth. He's doing the half bars.
Yeah.
Yeah. That it happens not that often, but it happens just a lot in the beginning because of the fact that it's just a lot of the same material. And then once you get obviously to G major, there. And I think that there should be a certain point in this prelude once where it's sort of understood how just harmonically it works, because it's a lot of the same thing, you know, it just keeps going, that you could maybe do even less and just let it play itself. Yeah, you've set a rhythm into the ear of the listener, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, and I know we've talked about this before, Tsai Tsai, but I wonder about the tempo.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, look, it's beautiful. I wouldn't change it. But I just want you to. I want you to consider how we can get the listener to hear a 6-bar, harmony, right? I mean, a harmony that essentially for 6 bars, not. That much, you have to be able to carry them. Yeah, and I think that if you stop too much in the middle of that, or if the tempo is a little bit too slow, it's very hard to hold their attention. Yeah, can you try? Just start at the beginning. One, half. Now, 6 bars. Keep going. 2 more bars. Yeah. And then you go back into the half bars, right? It just make sure that in the middle of these 6-bar things, it's going to happen a couple of times, yeah, that you don't stop in the middle. Yeah. It does. You don't need a because nothing has happened, right? I like it when you smile. Okay. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. You know, when you do it, it sounds so good. But even though it sounds so good, I don't like it very much. Right? When you move, like change the bow at the end, because what it does, it just kind of puts the brakes on, and I feel like that's another one of those places where you've already established A major, you've just hit the dominant, and now you gotta go, and the dominant is going to take you all the way to where?
T bass. Wait, no. A major.
Yeah, you're in A major from there all the way. To there, and then right back. Right? I think that's the wrong chord. Not that chord. But from there all the way to there. Yeah, and then that can just be like he's just letting it go. The way that you play, I think the way that you play the ending of this movement is beautiful. Yeah. In the Allemande, can you tell, are you counting in 4 or are you counting in 8?
4.
In 4, yeah. How does that affect your rhythm?
More smooth, not like not moving. Yeah.
Because I feel like even the it's so easy to be very picky about this, but even the 16th note pickup sounds a little bit more like an 8th note than a 16th.
Yeah.
Right? It has to just sort of welcome the downbeat. Can you try? Beautiful, beautiful. It, that one is an eighth note. I think that the issue that we have, and look, this is very hard, and actually, you never want to feel as though you're running out of bow in this, because you don't want that sound, right? And you're doing great with that. But I feel that sometimes giving the inner pulse, in other words, the eighth note, the middle eighth note of a beat, what it does, it's funny because it almost makes it sound like it's slower.
Yeah.
Would you like to sing for us?
Uh,
No.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, but it's just like these beats that are just kind of endless. You've seen, I know we've talked about this before, but you've seen the slower movements in the violin partitas or the violin sonatas, right? The solo. The rhythms are exactly the same as this. There's, you have the quarter notes, you have the eighth notes, you have the 16th notes, you have the 32nds, you have the 64th notes, and then you have a lot of the triplets in between.
Mhm.
He uses everything, and I think that's he's trying to create these big, with those rhythms. I think he's trying to create these big circles.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to carry. Just one more time. And what happens to the sound in the second beat?
Lost the sound.
I think that there has to, in where the tied over note, which is the second beat, the sound needs a little nuance.
Okay.
Yeah. Those notes are really fast and they're a little bit early. So as a result, that quarter note is a little bit shorter than the others.
Yeah.
Go a little bit before that. Careful with the yeah. To me, the rhythm is seems too fast. Your fingers move too fast.
Sorry.
You need old fingers
No. Okay.
for that.
Okay.
For that rhythm. Right from there. the slide is not as obvious. It's there. It has to be there, but it has to be implied. If it's heard, it's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one. Yeah. That one's pretty juicy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You know, I meant to say something, and it's not. It actually, when I was standing back there when you were playing, every once in a while, the third eighth note of the triplet in the prelude. Sorry, I was going back to the prelude. Sounds a little bit accented, and I think that it sounds accented because I think it's too short. Yeah. It sounds. Yeah. So I again, just so that you're making the larger line,
Yeah.
right? Do you mind trying that just at the beginning? Great, beautiful. I don't know, is that okay?
Yeah.
That you better say it's okay. You know, it's funny because it's that third note has a shape, right? And I don't think that it should be a dot. It has more of a I don't know. It's more this way. Yeah, it's not too dotted.
Okay.
Yeah, but it also still has to have a little bit of separation, right? Yeah, it's like the Shostakovich concerto dot and dash combination, right?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of a heavy, but it's not a separated dotted note.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You sound fantastic. As far as getting confident with something like that prelude, those two movements are probably the hardest two movements in all the 6 suites. I think that in terms of being confident when you're playing without even going into the issue of phrasing, I like to turn pieces into excerpts. You know, people that play in orchestra, that you can go to a music store and buy volumes and volumes of orchestral excerpts that will really help you with essentially the stuff that's problematic in the music. We don't have that. I mean, of course we do, but it's all written out. So just in terms of practice and becoming comfortable with a movement like this was obviously this piece was not written for a 4-string cello. This was written for the cello, the piccolo cello, which has an E string, right? Because in those days they never played in the upper positions. They didn't use the thumb for thumb position. So what I would do with something like this is break it down to the hard places, and make sure that I can start to get through the music faster. And honestly, with these preludes or any one of the movements of the Bach suites, I find that to get comfortable with the phrasing, as you were talking about, it helps me to go through the movements really fast, because you end up taking so many of the extra beats out. You're not leaving the beats out, but you're just taking out the so many places where we tend to stop because in learning something that is as awkward and difficult as this, we tend to stop a lot. You understand what I'm saying? So there's the technical aspect of it, but I think that what makes me feel most comfortable with just using this music to travel is often playing it too fast. And seeing how far can you carry the phrase before you just really have to kind of regroup and start again. For the most part in these preludes, they seem to be divided into similar phrase length types. I didn't really say that very well, I apologize.
That makes total sense.
But you know, like for instance, the C minor prelude has this tiny little opening which is 2.5 bars, and then in the half bar of the third bar, he starts with this phrasing that takes you about 8 bars, right? Maybe 8.5 bars. And there's a very, very awkward, chord right in the middle of that. And so everything goes to that chord, and from there it goes down. The next phrase is about 16 bars. So he's doubling the length he's building, right?
Yeah.
And then the third phrase, and that has an awful strange chord. If I played it for you without any context, you'd think, well, no, that's not Bach, that's Schoenberg. And then the third phrase is about twice that much, and then that takes you into the fugue. But then, interestingly enough, the fugue is divided into equal parts in terms of phrasing. And the original version of the fugue, the original version of that suite of the C minor is the lute version, and very clear. I have his handwritten, not the original. I wish I had the original, but I have a copy of the manuscript, and he puts as clear as you can see in French. Why in French, I'm not sure, but he put très vite, very, very fast. And it's interesting because if you practice it that way, it's so easy to fly through these phrases. Also makes it so that in terms of proportions, the prelude is not 10 times longer than every other movement in the piece. And that's really important to me. The prelude should be an introduction. It should not be a massive undertaking before we go into a dance suite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the chords that I was talking about are.
Yeah.
Well, the first one, but with the scordatura, there's an F in there. But then the next one is, and then that's.
It's like Kodai.
I know. It doesn't sound like Bach, but those are the exact chords, and because of the voice leading,
Yeah.
it works. In the C major fugue, there's a place where he puts a chord. I mean, there were like 10 of us trying to figure out what this chord was right before the final time that the C minor fugue starts again. Right before that final, it's actually much more beautiful than that. But that chord, the closest we could come to figure out what it was like a 13th chord with every other note missing. But those notes are heard because of all the voice leading that's coming to that chord. They're there. You're just not playing them, but they're ringing in the ear. It's fascinating. It's fantastic stuff. I actually do both. I practice the little excerpts that for whatever reason my hands don't want to play, or like maybe intonation things, maybe just the awkwardness of something. I will practice those, but then I go back to practicing the longer, the phrase. And I like, by increasing the tempo a lot, to see how far you can carry some of these phrases, because just doing that gives you such a different perspective on the music. Yes, and like I was saying to Tsai Tsai, once you set the listener into like a pace, which comes for me is always comes from the harmonic movement, not from the way that the notes are arranged. For instance, one harmony, one bar, one bar. 2 bars. Those are the first 4 bars. Then that's 2 bars. Two bars. And then here's the genius. 1 bar. 3 bars. He puts a little 3-bar segment in one harmony. And that's what I'm using I'm just using the rhythm between the notes to travel. Now there's that part of the question, but then the other side of your question is, imagine the prelude of the 4th suite, which moves 2 bars at a time for the first 8 bars. I'm exaggerating to make a point. I don't really need to stop on every other one because it's exactly the same harmony. So instead, you can do a... So it becomes a larger circular bar, right? Now, it makes it infinitely more challenging to play because you have a 4-string crossing that you have to kind of make disappear. But then what happens is that carries you for the first 8 bars, is 4 harmonies. And then the second phrase is exactly twice as long, and then he starts moving 1 bar at a time. Yeah, but in doing so, moving 1 at a time, I think that once I set your ears into hearing that motion of 1 at a time, I don't need to continue to go because I already have you going on that rhythm, right? Then interestingly, the 3rd phrase, he goes back and forth between 1 and 2, and then he all of a sudden flips everything upside down. He flips it upside down, and he plays around with that until you get to, and then the 4th phrase is essentially from the end of the 3rd all the way to the end. It's almost, it's a little over a page of music. And the way that I think he puts that together, and again, what he's doing is he's just, the phrases are getting larger and larger. The way he glues all the phrases on the 4th phrase together is with all these running 16th notes. That's the glue. You know, if I'm going to play a prelude, I would play it very differently than if I play it as a prelude to a suite. I would not approach it the same way at all. I would try to make a bigger deal out of just the prelude. I would probably play it slower and carry it through very differently. Maybe a bit more melodically and less harmonically. I mean, the harmonies are all going to be there anyway. But when I play all 6 together, then they become something completely different again. You have the major, minor, major, major, minor, major. And it's interesting that the 6th suite, which we think of as like sort of the monster, the mountain that we have to climb, ends up, because of the key, kind of being a little bit more relaxed than than it would be otherwise. The biggest one ends up being the fourth, the E flat. And you can see just by the distance between the first two notes. You got a 2-octave leap between 2 eighth notes. That kind of says a lot.
When you were growing up, your whole family is, what did your mother play?
My mother was a pianist.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Right. So you've got piano, you've got viola, you've got the cello. What else?
Well, my brother played violin at first.
Okay, right.
And my dad was also a violinist before he was a violist. So, we could always make it work.
Yeah. Was there a lot of competition between you guys?
No, not really. I mean, we kind of did very different things.
Right.
But, we would get together and play little arrangements that my dad would make for us to play.
It's so neat.
Yeah, it was, yeah, I never.
Did you all have the same teachers when you were very young, or did you go to different ones?
No, I studied with a cellist.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I could safely say that I studied with my dad
Yeah.
forever. I mean, still. I just played a concert. My dad is 83 years old. We just played a concert together
Oh, that's
in
so beautiful.
in Boston, and
Oh,
it was so great to hear him play again. It's just beautiful.
That's really fabulous.
Yeah.
And when did he start making bows?
My dad made his first bow probably like close to 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, and it was a bow that was essentially a copy of a bow that I had played that belonged to Rostropovich.
Oh my God.
Which was about this much longer than a regular cello bow.
Okay.
And so that's what this is. This is a copy of that. This one was actually made in China.
Really?
But the original one that I have, that this is a copy of, is the one that my father made.
When I first read your bio, years ago, when I first started with all this stuff, and I saw that your dad made bows, I just thought it was fabulous. I thought it was such a neat thing.
Oh yeah, no, he fixes instruments. He's
That's neat.
a great car mechanic. He does all kinds of crazy stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks, guys.